Okay, I don't see the numbers going up. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, I think you're good to go, Howard.
Okay, great. Let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the 2022 CUNY Accessibility Conference. My name is Howard Hines, one of your co-moderators, along with Ron Besseser, and we're happy to welcome you here for this afternoon's session. Today's session is called Hear Us Out on Being Hard of Hearing in Higher Education. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to relay. Captions are available. You can enable those at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to utilize our ASL interpreters, you will find them in the Participants tab, and you can pin them to your screen. If you require video to sign your question or microphone access to voice your question, please make your request in the chat so that we can update your Zoom settings accordingly. Right now, your microphones are off. You can ask. There is a dedicated question and answer session during the last 10 minutes of the presentation. To share relevant resources or links with others, please enter that information into the chat so we can chat that with attendees. We can share that. And lastly, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat so that our tech support team can do their best to assist you. With those items out of the way, today's session, college campuses are auditorily challenging places, especially for those with hearing loss. These auditory challenges are greater now during the COVID pandemic than ever before. Of course, the panel will also examine the pros and cons of remote work with respect to hearing loss and report on how we are facing and failing now that we have returned to on-site work. Without further ado, I will allow our speakers to introduce themselves and turn the floor over to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Leanne Fullington, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white woman with dark blonde hair. I am wearing red lipstick, glasses with a dark frame, and a black shirt. Feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. And we'll leave lots of time for a Q&A where you can unmute to ask questions or put additional questions in the chat. So our first slide, the image is of the hard of hearing icon, and it has a blue icon. It's a blue icon with a blue background and an image of an ear. Okay, so thank you for coming to our panel discussion this afternoon. For several years, Jill and I have been in conversation about how our hearing loss affects our work lives. We're currently conducting a qualitative study on the topic, but we realized that we don't have to wait until we have research findings to begin sharing information. Our panelists today are all CUNY library faculty colleagues, and we came together to do this panel to share our experiences and open up the conversation to a wider audience. Each of us on this panel brings a unique perspective as we are at different points in our careers and have different hearing loss trajectories. Monica, Jill, and I had done a similar panel for the Library Association of CUNY annual conference in 2021, and we met Tom and Adina through this work. One of the outcomes Jill and I had hoped for in doing this research was to convene a support network at CUNY and beyond. We are happy to say that the five of us have been in ongoing conversation about our hearing loss and mutually supporting each other through sharing advice and recommendations. Finding each other and not feeling so alone has been a huge boost for all of us. We brought this panel together to offer a glimpse into our lived experiences and also to share important considerations about working with hard of hearing colleagues. We'll discuss stigma and disclosure, technology and accommodations, fatigue, spaces and places, and the impacts of COVID-19. We also propose this panel because while everyone knows what hearing loss is, there are widespread misconceptions about this. One of the most common misconceptions about hearing loss is that it is only related to aging and that a younger person can't possibly be hard of hearing, or they're simply faking it. Furthermore, when a person doesn't hear well, this seems to signal that they're not intelligent or they're not paying attention, and this comes off as rudeness or aloofness or simply not caring. Some other misconceptions about hearing loss include that hearing aids will restore normal or perfect hearing, much like glasses will correct vision to 20/20. There's also a stereotype that persists and is marketed to the hard of hearing that one should want hearing aids to be tiny and easily hidden, which implies that one should perhaps feel ashamed for needing them. On top of this marketing angle, hearing aids are not generally covered by medical insurance. They're considered optional and sometimes even classified as cosmetic devices. In fact, one of our library colleagues, my colleague from Brooklyn College, Bill Gargan, was instrumental in advocating for an enhanced benefit for hearing aids through our union, PSC CUNY, as hearing aids are not covered through our primary health plans.
Hi, I'm Jill Cirasella, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman in my 40s with my hair in a ponytail and tortoiseshell glasses. We're still on the same slide as before, which says why this panel and has a series of microphones. Hearing loss is very common. About 25% of people who live to retirement age and 50% of people who live to age 75 experience it. And surprising but true, many people do not know that they have hearing loss. So sometimes you might be speaking with someone who has hearing loss but isn't aware of it, and therefore isn't aware of its effects on your interaction. So even if you and your loved ones all have good hearing now, there's a solid chance you or they will experience hearing loss at some point, and thus it's good to become aware of strategies for managing hearing loss and ways to advocate for accommodations. When you're hard of hearing, even if it's just one-sided, making meaning from sounds requires extra work and often a little extra time. As we'll explore later, that extra cognitive load causes fatigue. Comprehension is often aided, though, by a tacit understanding of how people move their mouths when they make different sounds, even for those who don't have any formal training in speech reading. Therefore, it's very helpful for people with hearing loss to have a speaker face them. That said, many sounds such as p, b, and m appear the same on the lips, and therefore there are real limits to how much information can be gained through speech reading. Some estimates say that even the most skilled speech readers can distinguish only about 30 to 40% of speech. So simply having a speaker face you is not a substitute for a necessary accommodation, and we'll address accommodations in detail a bit later. So, as Leanne mentioned, this is a panel of librarians, but we believe and hope that it will be interesting and relevant to all of you, regardless of whether you're staff, faculty, an administrator, or a student. All of us on the panel, like all of you, work in a variety of campus spaces: classrooms, offices, meeting rooms, quiet spaces, loud spaces, and now on Zoom as well. Each one of these environments poses challenges for those with hearing loss, and the difficulties are greater now than ever before, thanks to masking, distancing, and plexiglass barriers. So, regardless of what your campus role is, we hope you'll stick around, and as we said in our panel title, hear us out. So those are some of the reasons we proposed this panel, but who are we? We're going to spend a few minutes now introducing ourselves and our hearing stories.
Hello again. My name is Leanne Fullington, and I'm a reference and instruction librarian at Brooklyn College. On the slide, there is an image of the Brooklyn College Library with the gold clock tower. So my hearing loss is hereditary, and my dad, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother all had the same type of what is called sensorineural hearing loss. Tough one to say. Due to my family history, I knew my hearing would continue to deteriorate over time. My hearing has never actually been normal. I would fail hearing tests in elementary school, but I quickly figured out how to cheat by watching the tester's hands press the buttons and raise my hand to indicate when I'd actually not heard the tones. Ironically, I hit my breaking point with not hearing well when I was a note taker for students with disabilities as a postgraduate student at the University of Liverpool in England. It wasn't that I couldn't understand the accents. It was that I actually could no longer hear some of the lecturers' voices, no matter where I sat in the room. I've worn hearing aids for the past 15 years. As I'm deaf on certain tones and frequencies, this makes some speech and sounds impossible for me to hear. A hearing aid can't help on those tones. You can't amplify what you actually can't hear. So this tends to be voices that are on lower registers that are troublesome for me. I'll miss words because I literally won't hear parts of the conversation depending on the cadence of the speaker's voice.
Hi, I'm Monica Berger, and I am an instruction and scholarly communications librarian at City Tech. I am a white woman who is older with gray hair and big black eyeglass frames. The slide shows you the building at New York City College of Technology where the library is located. My hearing loss was gradual and was mostly the result of not wearing earplugs at concerts and when playing music. I was in my late 40s when I first recognized that my hearing was a problem. I was still bird watching regularly when I first recognized my hearing couldn't pick up the higher pitched birds, and I often couldn't hear my fellow birders. My hearing loss became really concerning when I couldn't hear colleagues in meetings. I went for my first audiology test 10 years ago, and I was advised to get hearing aids. The audiologist confirmed, I got my first set of hearing aids in 2015 and a second more high-tech set this summer. The audiologist confirmed that I have significant issues with understanding spoken words. My hearing aids are sometimes helpful, but when I'm working with students and colleagues, I often struggle to hear, and social situations can be difficult as well.
Hello again. I'm Jill Cirasella, and my pronouns are she, her. So I'm a scholarly communication librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center. On this slide is the information I just provided, as well as a photo of the Graduate Center building at the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street in Manhattan. My hearing loss happened suddenly in 2015. From one day to the next, my left side hearing cut out. Not entirely, but quite drastically. And at the very same time, a persistent ringing in the ear called tinnitus kicked in. As it turned out, the hearing loss and tinnitus were the first two symptoms of a brain tumor known as an acoustic neuroma or vestibular schwannoma. The tumor was surgically removed, but the hearing loss and tinnitus will always be with me, along with problems with balance and vertigo and several long-term surgical complications. I use a hearing aid on my left side, and the tinnitus is better when the hearing aid is in, since tinnitus on a given frequency is improved when there's better auditory input to the brain. But when my hearing aid isn't in, there's an incessant high-pitched tone, which is certainly annoying, but also affects my hearing and concentration and complicates my experience of all the important alarms, beeps, and buzzes of everyday life. Adina, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So my name is Adina Mulliken, and I'm a social work librarian and associate professor at Hunter. The slide has the information that I just mentioned and my email address, and there's a photo of the Silberman School of Social Work. I'm a white middle-aged woman with medium-length brown hair and a multicolored sweater. My pronouns are she and her. I have a mild to moderate hearing loss and tinnitus. I use hearing aids at times, mostly when interacting in person at work. I have difficulty hearing in environments where multiple conversations are happening or where noise is present, even with hearing aids. And I sometimes have difficulty hearing individuals in quiet environments if they're wearing a mask or facing away, or if they have a higher or softer voice. I became aware of a mild hearing loss at age 40. I was just following a general recommendation to get a hearing test at that age. And I was a student in disability studies at that time in a graduate program when I was diagnosed. I felt lucky to have been in an environment that encouraged disability pride. Accepting the irreversible difficulties that come with even mild hearing loss isn't easy, but feeling like there was a supportive and proud community of people with disabilities around me made it easier to prepare for the need for hearing aids a few years later.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Nielsen. My pronouns are he, him. The screen is of a slide that shows a picture of the interior of the Bronx Community College Library and a picture of the York College in Queens. And I am a 50-year-old white man. I have glasses and a headset. So I'm an adjunct librarian at York College and Bronx Community College. As a child, I was diagnosed with a genetic kidney disease that also caused a loss of half my hearing by age 12. Because my hearing loss happened at a very vulnerable time in my development, I was very self-conscious and private about it. In fact, the hearing aids my parents bought me at the time went unused until I was in college and felt more anonymous in the college setting. However, hearing aids helped me enormously. I would not be able to do the service-oriented work of a librarian without them. But they come with their own set of stressors. Initially, they were uncomfortable and the sound was not like real sound. They caused ear infections if I didn't clean them regularly. They're expensive, and not until recently were they covered by insurance. My last pair cost $1,800. I was allergic to the ear mold casing of one pair and had to have them replaced. I've lost 2 hearing aids. Much of this gray hair is the result of that. I've had countless panic attacks because I didn't have a spare battery, and I could probably be charged with environmental crimes for the thousands of tiny spent batteries I've sent to landfills. On the bright side, though, I've had hearing loss long enough to develop behaviors and strategies to hear better. For example, I hear better on the left ear, in the left ear. So if possible, I move to the right of sounds wherever I am. When I'm having trouble hearing someone, I often turn my head to the right and focus my attention on watching their lips and mannerisms to read their body language. I don't read lips, but I find this helpful when I miss words and phrases and need to decipher what the speaker said. Okay, so those are our introductions. And instead of each of us expanding on our hearing loss story at length, we identified several themes during our discussions about this panel, and we'll share some of our experiences around those themes. And Leanne talked about this at the beginning, and I'll just reiterate them. The first is stigma and disclosure. The second is technology and accommodation. The third is cognitive load and fatigue. The fourth is the impact of spaces. And the fifth is COVID. So the first topic we'll talk about is disclosure, and Monica is going to start us off.
So this slide, entitled Stigma and Disclosure, depicts a group of wooden figurines gathered together opposite of a singleton. So in private, I never felt especially uncomfortable telling people I wear hearing aids. The difficulty is speaking up in public settings when I just can't understand what is being said. So we often emphasize hearing aids do not fix our hearing problems. This happens quite frequently. For example, when I'm working with students one-on-one, helping them with their research, we often struggle to communicate. It's noisy in that part of the library, and many students speak softly, and quite a few have accents. What is especially frustrating is when I ask the students to try to speak louder, they respond, and then I still can't understand them. How many times should I ask them to repeat themselves? When these problems happen with colleagues, it is especially difficult. When I assert myself, whether once or repeatedly, but there's no improvement and I still can't hear, a lot of feelings come up. Am I being ignored? Sometimes I just give up and accept the situation with the result that I'm completely left out of the meeting or the conversation. Yet, it was a very positive experience when I finally disclosed my hearing disability with students when I was teaching. The story behind this is rather interesting. So I was teaching a library workshop for an English composition class, and as usual, I was positioning myself very close to students in order to hear them. The English instructor noticed this and asked me to talk to her after class was over. She suggested I disclose my hearing impairment to the students and ask them to try their best to speak up. And I felt as if I was finally given permission to disclose my disability. I still have to move very close to students to hear them, but now it is less awkward because they know why. Next, Tom will talk about his experiences.
Thanks, Monica. Even without hearing loss, adjunct work is challenging. Working part-time prevents adjuncts from seeing and communicating with colleagues, both formally and informally. And as a result, adjuncts may miss some important communication or information. I try to bridge this gap by establishing and maintaining collegial relationships with my supervisor and other full-timers and communicating regularly with them. Part of establishing that relationship is disclosing my hearing challenges so they are aware of my disability and the potential problems that arise, such as high stress circumstances like losing a hearing aid or not having backup batteries, or needing a phone with volume control. When colleagues know my hearing challenges, it's easier for me to summon the courage to speak up for myself when I've missed some communication or need some help to make the work environment more conducive to hearing well.
And building on what Tom is saying and what also Monica has said is that working in academia, where being quick-witted and intellectual is rewarded and highly prized, it can often feel like you're being judged if you don't swiftly reply to a question or if you have to ask for clarification. Many of us may try to mask our hearing loss to avoid being perceived as less intelligent than our peers in such a competitive environment. With hearing loss, it may take me a beat or two, sometimes longer, to parse out what has been said to or asked of me, as I may have missed a word or two or several, and my brain is now furiously trying to match vocabulary to context. And if I miss the question or the meaning and I reply with something way off, it's really quite embarrassing. Many of us in academia have been socialized into needing to be the smartest or the best, and we may have internalized some shame about our hearing loss. Even as an undergraduate, for example, a professor had written in my student evaluation that I was aloof and presented myself as separate from the class. Honest truth, I couldn't hear well, so I stayed quiet and didn't participate much in the seminar. And if I was asked to talk, because I had trouble hearing and following along, my contributions may have been a little bit off topic. Thus, the professor perceived me as thinking what I had to say was more important than what the class was discussing. I was mortified to find out that I came off as arrogant when all I was doing was trying to blend in and not draw attention to myself. So our next discussion area will focus on the technologies and the requests for accommodation that some of us have made. And Adina will start us off in this part of our conversation.
Okay, so the slide now says technology and accommodations, and it has a picture that looks to me like an old-fashioned and unusual looking silver horn. The slide says, "What's this? A collapsible Victorian era ear trumpet," and it was a hearing aid in the Victorian era, I guess. I just learned that this morning. So I'll say a few things about my experiences with technology. Although I can currently often use my hearing, I'm concerned that I've observed a lack of good quality captioning through CART and human transcriptionists at events and classes at CUNY. These were more previous that I saw them at my previous institution. I understand that you can request these as an accommodation if you need, but I just worry that I don't see other people receiving it. I don't know if there's, how much practice is there for budgeting and making it available, but I hope I'm wrong. Well, auto captioning such as Zoom can be helpful at times. It's not accurate enough to meet ADA requirements, and having to rely on captioning with that level of inaccuracy seems like it would be very difficult. I appreciated that somebody in the last panel mentioned that too. Similarly, I wonder what I'll do if I need a more accessible phone eventually. Currently, I sometimes have to push the volume up button continually during a conversation to prevent the volume from randomly changing. But when I and colleagues have asked for technical support with the phones, we generally haven't really been able to get help with it. So now Leanne will talk about her experience with seeking a reasonable accommodation.
So in terms of the promise of accommodation and technology, things didn't quite measure up. I had applied for a reasonable accommodation through my college's human resources for a microphone that would work with my hearing aids. I had done some research about this particular device called a streamline mic that would amplify a speaker's voice by streaming their voice to my hearing aids via Bluetooth. I had hoped that the mic would be a solution to hearing in the classroom or at the reference desk. However, the mic had to be very close to the person speaking, like clipped to their short or held up to their mouth, and it was really small. So passing the mic around the classroom didn't work. Placing the mic at the desk or holding it up to a colleague or the student didn't work. It amplified the background noise more so than the person's voice. And if I passed it around, the horrible crackling noise going from hand to hand was really jarring for me. So this mic wasn't really a solution at all. However, I did discover that I can use it for streaming my work computer via Bluetooth to my hearing aids, which helps for Zoom meetings that would require me to be on an active screen share or co-working on a document. This is super helpful in the open office environment at my library, as I can't really use headphones, as I'd have to take out my hearing aids to put the headphones on. And if someone needed to talk to me, I'd have to take the headphones off, put my hearing aids back in, and then have the conversation. So yes, the accommodation was granted. However, in practicality, it didn't really work very well. Furthermore, as Adina had mentioned previously, the phone has also been my nemesis for quite a long time. I had also requested an iPad to be able to stream phone calls via Google Voice to my hearing aids, as my office phone is not hearing aid compatible, nor is the reference desk phone. But we couldn't get Google Voice to work properly with the iPad. The ITS technologist couldn't get it to work. I couldn't get it to work. So the phone still remains an issue for me. The workaround, I have to pop the little dome of my hearing aid out of my ear, turn the volume on the phone all the way up as loud as possible, and then hope for the best with the phone conversation. Sometimes I can hear the person on the other end, depending on their voice range or their connection. Sometimes I can't. And since I'm deaf on numerous tones, it's hit or miss with the phone and context. So popping the dome out of my ear and letting it hang, though, poses problems, as the little wire connecting the dome to the amplifier, I have the behind the ear type hearing aids, it's fragile. So that little wire could break, and then I'd have to send the hearing aid out for repair and only have one hearing aid. Not ideal at all.
So this is Adina again. I've also experienced less than helpful accommodations process where it was up to me to figure out what technology would help. As we all returned to work in person this spring with masks, I wanted to explore amplification devices so I could handle in-person instruction. So I called the AV desk and asked if they had a microphone they could set up in classes, which I would pass around to students if I was having difficulty hearing them. Luckily, they did. I decided to ask for an official accommodation in case I ran into issues like competition scheduling the microphone or the microphone breaking. As it turned out, the microphone was available and it was very helpful in a few classes. And I found I didn't need it often enough. Often I could hear well enough that it wasn't worth the trouble of walking the microphone to the students in classes. But I was glad I learned what I did about requesting accommodations from this process. I found the accommodations form on HR's website and I emailed it in. The College Council replied saying that I had to submit a medical form. I understood employers were supposed to keep the process timely, and I wasn't sure, but I thought that they were not supposed to ask for medical documentation if my disability was obvious. My hearing aids and my colleagues' knowledge of my hearing loss over the years probably made it pretty obvious. However, I made an audiologist appointment, which ended up taking over a month due to winter storms and other things. As the semester approached and I realized there might not be time to get the form filled out and arrange the accommodation before I started teaching, I sent a follow-up letter to the council. I cited the Job Accommodations Network website, where I had found advice that employers should not request medical documentation for obvious disabilities. So as politely as I could, I said I wasn't sure that they had to wait for the medical form and that I'd be happy to talk sooner if she thought it would be good to have more time. And so she responded right away and asked when I could be available for a call. She was apologetic that she's so busy and helpfully agreed that I could contact her if I needed any support with the microphone or if my audiologist recommended any other devices. So what I learned is that it's important for me to learn how the accommodations process is supposed to work and speak up. Also, I'm pretty sure I'll have to research technological accommodations on my own, which seems like it is going to be time consuming. Speaking of time consuming, seeking accommodations can also be taxing, which leads us to the next part of our panel regarding cognitive load and fatigue. So now Monica will start on that.
So this slide.
Oh, Monica, you're muted.
Sorry. This slide, thank you, Jill. Cognitive load and fatigue depicts a fuel gauge pointing to empty. So, as an introverted person, I find teaching and conference going tiring or even exhausting by the sheer virtue of the social intenseness of each. It took me many years to recognize that my hearing deficits compounded the cognitive load strain of being a shy person in public. Teaching is tiring simply because it's like juggling many balls at once while trying to project enthusiasm and caring while keeping the energy in the classroom up. And I move around a lot just to sort of keep my energy higher. Prompting students running to the whiteboard to write down what they said, going to the front of the classroom to demonstrate search strategies, and often enough, asking students to repeat what they said. So conferences kill me for many reasons, including speakers and participants not using mics and the small talk and banter at lunch and between sessions, and the attendant struggle to connect in conversations when it's loud and busy. But the main thing is just the strain of listening all day. So Jill's going to share her experiences next.
And speaking of the strain of listening, research studies have actually shown that those with hearing loss take longer to process speech. And I'm very aware of that extra time and effort when I'm in a noisy or otherwise challenging hearing environment. It's like I can feel my brain's gears turning as it tries to match the sounds it heard to the words those sounds could be. It's work and it's tiring. So much so that sometimes I just can't listen anymore. But also, since I have other neurological issues, including persistent headaches, sometimes I just can't use my eyes anymore. And at that point, I sometimes employ speech-to-text technology to listen to things rather than read them. Because even though my hearing is compromised, I can often still absorb things by listening when I can no longer absorb them by reading. But then there are also times when I just can't go on and must rest. I can't say how much of this full body fatigue is due to my hearing loss versus my other issues, but it doesn't matter. It's all part of an overall health picture that is taxing and exhausting. And I end up using both sick time and vacation time to take that rest that's so essential for me. So my kind of brain tumor is rare, so my specific situation is uncommon, but the general phenomenon of frequent, inescapable fatigue is fairly common. Many people, including certainly many of our colleagues and students, have multiple disabilities or chronic health problems, and the physical and mental toll adds up. So we can also all be affected by the spaces that we work in. And Leanne and Tom are going to address the ways different spaces can affect our hearing.
Okay, so the image on the slide is an architectural drawing of a modernist building captioned South Elevation. So as a librarian with responsibilities to several departments for library instruction, students often contact me for research consultations. Though my consultations are by appointment, they are akin to teaching faculty meeting with students during office hours. Where I work, the librarians are in an open office setting, so we don't have privacy for our consultations. Instead, we use computer workstations near the reference desk in the open computer lab. This area, however, can be quite noisy, as it's a high traffic area for the printers, and the auditorium that is used for large lecture classes is adjacent. The ambient noise is harsh, and it makes it very difficult for me to hear and communicate with the student. I try to book a library classroom if I can, or hope the classroom next to the reference desk is not in use, and I'll go in there for consultations. In that closed classroom space, I can ask the student to speak more loudly, as they may whisper in the open library space, even though it's clearly not a quiet space. I can also better focus on seeing and hearing the student by being in a space with much less background noise. Thus, finding an alternative place for the consultations is one such self-accommodation I use in the workplace. How the space is arranged also complicates hearing issues. In our shared office space, the cubicles are set up so that the occupant's back is facing out. As I can't hear from behind, I'm often startled when a colleague comes to my desk to ask me something. If I was facing out, I could see them coming and prepare myself to hear and interact. Also, if I didn't have my hearing aids in, I can't hear at all. And then I would need to put the aids in while the person is standing there. As I mentioned earlier, I don't use headphones at my desk for webinars or to listen to music and focus, as I have to keep the volume so high on the headphones. And if someone did come ask me something, I'll have to take the headphones off, put in my hearing aids, and quickly adjust to communicating. Now, with the Bluetooth streaming to my hearing aids, I can listen to webinars or meetings this way and quickly pivot to conversing with a colleague by pausing the audio. When I teach in the classroom, if the desks are close together, it's very hard to get to the student to be close enough to hear. Furthermore, we have really aggressive fans in the ventilation system in the library, so this background noise is an absolute roar to be reckoned with. It's incredibly tiring to be working so hard to hear and to figure out the context and communicate in the classroom environment with this ambient noise coming from the HVAC system that complicates all of this even more. When I teach, I tell students as I introduce myself that I'm hard of hearing and will need them to speak up to ask questions. And I put the volume up on my hearing aids as high as I can as I'm teaching the session.
I work almost exclusively at the library reference desk, and the work environments at Bronx Community College and York College are very different. York's library reference desk is near the library entrance, the circulation desk, copiers, and guest computers. So it's noisy, which is very challenging when your hearing aids pick up all noises and you have to filter out everything except the student you're helping. I've been able to use this environment to my advantage because if that student has a question that requires demonstrating anything on a computer, I immediately invite them to sit near me so that I can share my computer monitor with them. This spatial arrangement isn't ideal, but it does allow me to concentrate on hearing them and filtering out everything else. Bronx Community College's reference desk is situated at one end of a large room, which allows me to see students coming toward the reference desk and can prepare myself to focus on what they say. However, this academic year, I've worked at Bronx Community College on site 1 day a week and immediately had trouble hearing because not only were masks required for anyone in the library, but plexiglass barriers were also set up at the reference desk, creating another barrier to being able to hear students. As a result, I sent a note to the BCC librarians, letting them know my concerns about hearing students and that I may need to use a research consultation room next to the reference desk where I would be able to hear the student better. So here's more on how COVID changed our work environments for better or worse. And Leanne is going to start us off.
Okay. The image in the slide is of a mask that is black that says hard of hearing, please be patient. Now, when working remotely, doing consultations with students over Zoom was a revelation. I could hear them. I could control the volume of my computer. I could turn on closed captioning. Through screen sharing, we could work together to do searches or troubleshoot, just as we could in person sitting at a computer in the library. So now I offer consultations either in person or Zoom, with a very strong preference for Zoom.
So speaking of Zoom, I need to mention hybrid situations. Unless there's a portable mic, the speaker is only audible if they're close enough to the computer. I experienced a few hybrid HiFlex meetings and events and it was like hearing the adults in Peanuts, except from a mile away. I should also mention that I am immunocompromised, and there's nothing worse than when you're working with a student and you can't hear them and they take down their mask. I'm also very enthusiastic about doing consultations and faculty and student workshops virtually. And I acknowledge that teaching on Zoom isn't ideal for student engagement and interaction, but ultimately it's not only safer, but much less stressful. Lastly, I want to thank my colleagues for being wonderful about remembering to automatically turn on closed captioning for me.
My experience working remotely mirrors Leanne's, and I've been very lucky to be able to work remotely the past 2 years, especially since, like Monica, I too am immunocompromised. However, I wanted to address the double-edged sword that COVID presents to someone with hearing loss. I find that because of masks, I tend to move closer to people I'm speaking with instead of maintaining social distancing, which puts me at risk. And as a man, I'm also aware of the potential creepy factor that this presents. And while I haven't had any students react negatively to me moving closer to hear them, if I need to, I will disclose my hearing loss to make my intent as clear as possible.
Hi, this is Jill again. Like Leanne, Monica, and Tom, I have mostly very positive things to say about working with students and meeting with colleagues over Zoom. But for me, the biggest benefit of remote work was removing 90 to 120 minutes per day of commuting, which for me involves both riding the subway and walking through the Herald Square area of Manhattan. Both parts of my commute are noisy and also challenging on my compromised balance system, and removing the commute made a huge difference in my life. I started the workday with more energy and focus. I kept my ability to concentrate longer. I was less exhausted and less plagued by headaches. And now that I'm commuting again, the fatigue and headaches are worse, and I'm still trying to build my stamina up and figure out a way to make it all work. On numerous occasions, I've had to close my door and take a nap in my office at the end of the workday, simply to have enough energy to walk to the subway and make it home. So I so hope, for my sake and others, that CUNY will agree to allow some work from home on an ongoing basis. And if not, I'm aware that I may need to seek an accommodation in order to do so. So now you've heard our stories and may have some questions, but first we want to leave you with some things we'd like our colleagues to know.
Okay, the image on the screen is a drawing of 2 squares with human faces having a conversation. Finding community has been incredibly helpful, and it's amazing to not feel so alone. Being able to talk to each other about our concerns and how we've handled things on our campuses has been absolutely invaluable. My community was always just my dad and my grandma. I didn't have any hard of hearing coworkers or friends. When I started at Brooklyn College, I met Bill Gargan, one of the other librarians, and he was also hard of hearing. And we chatted about audiologists and hearing aids actually quite often. We even both shared packets of batteries we would stash at the reference desk. And then Jill became hard of hearing, and I had another person in my life. And then now there's the 5 of us. So being able to go to each other, to share institutional knowledge, and to not have to figure it all out on our own, and just to be supporting each other, it has just been such a huge boost. We'd love to have more people in our little community. If you're interested, please email one of us or all of us, and we can add you to our email group.
So yeah, I was very much alone before I found this group. I've always had people in my life who were hearing impaired, including my father. But the difference now is that I feel like I'm taking an active role in my situation. Simply by talking with our group, it helps me better understand how, although we're all unique in our hearing stories, we do share many things in common. We have to be active in seeking out the support we need. And invisible disabilities like ours put the burden on the individual to constantly advocate for themselves in the moment. And that's really hard. And my final comment, don't neglect to wear earplugs. Once you damage your hearing, it will never come back.
Hi, this is Jill again. So for what I'd like to share, I want to build on what Leanne said earlier about how being sharp and smart is prized in academia. 100%. In our line of work, it is not easy to have problems that affect your ability to think, read, comprehend, or communicate. My particular cluster of health issues have affected my cognition in a variety of ways, and that's made me grapple all over again with who I am, what makes me me, and my sense of personal and professional worth. As I mentioned earlier, I now have trouble with focused long form reading, and I feel quite a lot of shame and insufficiency about that. Indeed, until now, I've been too scared of others' judgments to tell more than a few people. But I'm doing it here now, both because I feel we're amongst friends and because I want to use this platform to urge you to believe and be kind when others reveal a disability or vulnerability or need. And finally, if you're not already familiar with it, I encourage you to read the so-called spoon theory of chronic illness. I'll put a link to it in the chat in a moment. In short, the spoon theory is an extended metaphor about how those with chronic illness have fewer energy reserves and have to carefully guard how they spend their energy. The spoon theory resonates with me so much and has helped me resist academia's call to endlessly work and constantly strive. Chances are that many of you are familiar with the spoon theory already, but if you aren't, I strongly encourage you to read it and consider it in your work with folks with disabilities, chronic illness, or other causes for fatigue.
This is Adina. I strongly agree with what the others said about having community and self-advocating. I'm really thankful that Monica told me about a presentation that 3 of the librarians in this group did at a previous conference, which is how I connected with them. It's easy to feel selfish for asking for accommodations that take money or resources. But when I feel like the request, when I feel that requesting what I need might help set or maintain a precedent that would be useful for others, I feel more okay about asking. Another thing, if I ask you if you could speak up or face me, it's really helpful if you're able to concentrate on doing so throughout the conversation. After asking someone to repeat 2 or occasionally even 3 or 4 times, I usually probably would give up. If you're having difficulty speaking more loudly for some reason, maybe you feel a little uncomfortable or have a sore throat, or could be a lot of different reasons. It's really helpful for me if you're able to tell me that, and then maybe we can work out a way to go somewhere else or find an alternative way to communicate. So now Tom will talk.
Thanks, Adina. It's strange to say, but being hard of hearing is like being gay. You're not sure if you should say something because you don't know how people will react. But when you do, it's usually a relief because most people accept that about you and address you knowing this. For example, it's amazingly gratifying when friends and colleagues automatically position themselves to my left when we walk somewhere, knowing I prefer this side in order to hear better. Or when I tell a college assistant I wear a hearing aid and he speaks louder to help me out. The bottom line is that if you're not sure what to do when someone tells you that they are hard of hearing, just ask. I will be grateful that you want to know how you can help me. Okay, so that is our presentation, but if we can help you, please let us know. As Leanne said before, we'd love to have more colleagues join our community. email us and we can add you to our email group. And thank you for listening. We're happy to take questions for the remaining time.
All right. We thank you for a great presentation. During the presentation, we did have a few questions that came up. So let's go through them. So has anyone of the panelists considered a cochlear implant?
Well, I can go ahead and answer that. My father actually recently got one, maybe it's probably been about 2.5 years ago. Once he qualified for Medicare, he was able to get one. You get much better coverage through Medicare to get these. So I know that I can see the future coming and that most likely I'll need one as well, but I'm gonna, put it off for a while just because my hearing aids, they do a good enough job. My hearing is going to continue to deteriorate. So once it gets to the point where the hearing aids aren't helping, and this is the point my father got to, it was time. It was just time. So I know in the future, most likely that's a direction I'll go in. But for right now, the hearing aids, they're doing a pretty darn good job.
Yeah, I would say that I've heard about cochlear implants and I've talked to the audiologist that I have about them, and it's not appropriate for me because the difference would be so different. And I already have at least half of my hearing, and the hearing that I have was something that I developed, like Howard was talking about in his comment. I developed with hearing and then I lost it at 12. So I know the hearing environment, and a cochlear implant would be so much different, even more different than the hearing aids that I wear, that I know I wouldn't like it.
And to kind of follow up on that, even just trying to relearn how to hear with hearing aids in these more noisy environments now. Remember, a lot of us have either been living alone or just isolated with our families in the pandemic. Your brain gets used to processing sounds that certain way. And now that we're being thrust back into like the academic environment, or, those of us in the reference desk environments that are very loud, our brains are like trying to figure out what's going on there, what's an important noise, what's not. So we have to relearn how to process the sounds and know, no, that fan is not what I need to be paying attention to. It's this person speaking to me, but my brain's not quite there yet again. So it takes a lot of practice and adjustment. And just as Tom said, moving to a cochlear from hearing aids, huge learning curve with that. My father has spoken openly about that with me, where he's like, it's going to be really hard at first, but it'll be worth it. He's like, you have to relearn how to hear. He's like, I didn't know I could hear the blinker in the car. I didn't know that, like, when I walk, my shoes make that noise. Like, so there's little things where like everybody else's brain filters it out and ours doesn't, because it didn't know it was there to begin with.
Something I'd like to, sorry.
I just wanted to quickly jump in that when you first get your hearing aids, you'll have a similar experience because you'll start to hear things you missed.
And I was just going to add that something that I think everybody should be mindful of as they consider cochlear implants is that it is a surgery on your cranium. And as somebody who had the worst possible outcome of cranial surgery, I got bacterial meningitis from it. That is not something I would ever go through lightly. And so if my left side hearing continues to degrade, I could be eligible for a cochlear implant, but I'm not sure I would do it because I have now had 2 brain surgeries and I am not eager to have another cranial surgery.
Okay. So someone asked, or someone said, a very informative session. As a fellow colleague who has a disability, stuttering, what are some of the techniques you employ to limit perception that one's disability limits one's performance output?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind on that is telling people that I have hearing loss. I feel lucky that I feel like my colleagues are very understanding, and I don't think that would be the case in all contexts. But I think just repeatedly explaining that, sorry, I didn't hear, could you repeat, as often as I can, help some so that they know what's going on. It's obviously not a complete solution, but maybe I'll see if anybody else has anything to say.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the questioner, who is a colleague of mine. And I think that from my experience, I would probably have to talk to a therapist about this, but I kind of wonder sometimes if my motivation was stronger because I felt the hearing had held me back, so that earlier in my career, I was trying to work harder to do more things and be involved more in order to combat that kind of a perception that, oh, I see that Tom wears a hearing aid. Maybe he's not the best person or candidate for management or for a promotion or for this job or something like that.
And what I would add too is for several years after my brain surgeries to remove the tumor, I had incredible difficulty accessing my vocabulary with word recall. And that was really embarrassing because I knew things that I couldn't get out in an articulate fashion. And so it's not the same thing as your challenge, but I know the feeling. And that did prompt me to, for myself, if I was going to be speaking, to script everything out ahead of time, or to spend more time, possibly too much time, drafting emails so that they would be as articulate as possible. Most of my word recall has come back, but I'm still a little slow accessing my vocabulary bank, so that it still comes up sometimes.
Hey, thank you. Regarding the phone issue, have you considered a captioned phone or a captioning app on your cell phone?
I can start on that question. It has somewhat crossed my mind because my father found one for my stepmother, so I saw one. My stepmother had hearing loss more significant than mine, but I haven't explored that in detail. So if whoever asks that has information that they want to share, I would love any information. I recently found a website that seems pretty helpful called Job Accommodations Network. About it talks in depth about various accommodations, technological accommodations. It gives lists of particular products. I still feel a lot of concern that figuring out what would work with my office phone and work for me and everything is a big undertaking. And I'm not at the point necessarily that it's critical enough that I'm going to spend a huge ton of time on it, but I definitely am moving to try to learn as I go before it gets to the point that it's critical. So thank you for that suggestion, and definitely I'd be interested to hear more if the person has recommendations.
Yeah, to follow up on what Adina is saying, because I started this path on accommodation at work, I haven't looked at for cell phones or anything, because my personal cell phone is my personal cell phone. My work phone is a whole different thing. And the office phones we have, I don't know if a hearing aid compatible or a captioning phone would work on our system. So the college might say, yeah, no, I don't know if we can do that for you. So I'm not far enough along to have started pushing for that. We had thought Google Voice would be useful because it does transcribe your phone messages. One of the things that I've discussed with my boss actually is just putting something on my voicemail that says, this voicemail box does not accept messages. If you need to get in touch with Professor Fullington, please email her, just because I can't understand the voicemail messages half the time. So we've taken my phone number off my my research guides. Like, I don't share my phone number unless I absolutely have to. So it's kind of a workaround of like, well, if I can avoid the phone as much as possible, that's good enough for now, but it's not going to be good enough forever. I understand that. So your question, yeah, absolutely. I wish I knew if that would work, and it's something I'll be looking into for sure. But for right now, we're not far enough along in the process. We thought Google Voice would be the answer. It's not. No, it's a process.
All right, thank you for that. So what advice would you impart to students who are deaf, hard of hearing, who are about to transition to college? What options are available to them? To expound on that question, what are the accommodations that are available for them?
It's interesting because we don't work in student disability services offices, there's probably a lot that's available to them that we're not aware of. And one of the things we've talked about is because we're not students, we don't have like a service point like students do. But my niece is hard of hearing, and she is in her first year of college, and she upon arriving at college, went to the Office for Students with Disabilities, and they have a few accommodations for her, including CART, for captions, and also a note taker. So somebody who will take notes in lectures for her so she can use her energy focusing on listening.
Anyone else want to?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Ron. I'll second that, working in the library, I'm definitely not the most knowledgeable and really not very knowledgeable about what accommodations are available, and feel more like I'm struggling to figure that out myself. But I see that one of our moderators here has a job title of Director of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, so he might want to say something. As far as the library goes, since we're librarians, I do have some experience with when the faculty are showing pre-recorded videos or DVDs, searching to figure out how to get captioned versions of those, which can be, there's a lot to that, and I probably can't remember all of it very articulately, but if you want to contact a librarian about that issue, or ask your disability services people to contact a librarian, I'm definitely interested in helping with that.
All right, thank you. Okay, and speaking of Howard had this very long paragraph. So Howard, in the interest of time, I could read it, but I was wondering if you would just like to elaborate verbally.
Well, I was hoping that you would read it, but before you read it, I'll just comment to what was just said. As a Director of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services for the university, I can tell you that my charge is working on behalf of students with a hearing loss, and it ranges from moderate to severe to profound. And yes, we provide a variety of services for those students. But one of the biggest, particularly for students who are hard of hearing, is just simply disclosing that they have a hearing loss, number one. I can also tell you, number two, that we have a low percentage, but it's a very strong percentage of people who become deaf while they're in college. And it doesn't even put them into deaf or hard of hearing categories because they're in such shock. They don't fit in either one or the other. And so we're working with them as well. We range everything from CART, from sign language interpreters, from CPRINT, and just a variety of things. But the first step is being able to at least disclose to our students with disabilities offices what to do. And I just have to say before time runs out that I cannot thank you enough for stepping out of the closet, taking advantage of this platform to tell us your experiences. You all will hear from me again, trust me. I am working very closely with the hard of hearing students, and they need to see role models such as yourselves. I think without having to go through the paragraph that I sent, I would just say that my questions were how phone impacts your work. If you were familiar with the AI Otter, which is a system that allows you to translate from voice to text so that you can keep it near you and always hear what people around you are saying, things of that nature. And I think it was something else that in terms of what did you think about enhancing your communication abilities by learning sign language and things of those natures. And of course, I had a question about, so everyone thinks that captioning solves everything. And I just said, I hope they can address how they feel about it. I know for myself, who are hearing or maybe gradually experiencing some loss, I'm constantly chasing it, chasing and chasing. And I wonder what my life would be like. I would be grateful that I'd have something to keep me locked in, but at the same time, with it going so fast, there is still some information that you miss. And for students who are deaf, whose primary language is American Sign Language, that moving rapidly and that English does not get half of what they should be getting. It just keeps them in a look to some level. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you will be hearing from me again.
Okay, so I wonder if someone could just answer this question really quick. We're just about out of time, and I want to be able to tell you about the sessions tomorrow. Thank you for this excellent session. This is a request for your collective strategic thinking. How can we get CUNY to step up on a resource such as a paid service for providing accurate captioning? I've spent time doing captions. It's very labor intensive. And YouTube and Zoom auto captions are not sufficient for accuracy. So if somebody can answer that in 30 seconds.
All right, I've been on panels at 2 different universities where I've worked, where they went around and around in circles for years, trying to decide how to get started because of all the questions about like how much captioning will we need? Nobody can figure out a budget for that. I don't know what the current state of that is at CUNY, but I'm sorry, I don't have an answer. I'm just kind of mentioning one of the issues that I've run into, that there are other questions about the technology. It's not really an answer, but
I think the short answer might be we're not perfectionists, but we're constantly striving towards perfection.
All right, thank you so much. Sorry, everyone, that we ran out of time if we didn't get to your questions. But so before I go, I would like to thank the presenters for a great presentation, very informative. Thank you so much. And thank everyone for coming. So please join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. sharp for our keynote with Dr. Denise Maybank, CUNY Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and Enrollment Management. And there will be sessions to follow, so definitely come to those. You can use the same Zoom link, and that would work. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.
And thank you, interpreter.
Bye.
All right, thanks, everyone. Great job. Such
Thank
informative
you.
stuff.
Thank you for having us, for hosting us.
Yes.
Howard,
thank
I'm so
you.
glad you were here.
Yeah, that was great.
yes.
How could I not?
Yeah, that was helpful.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't, I mean, I don't know much at all about services for students. I'd like to know more.
Well, call
Yeah.
me anytime.
Although we have
Email
all,
address.
but we have all probably suffered from doing closed captioning, and
Yeah, it is very challenging, you know, and you have to be accurate, and so especially in classes where it's like science-based, math-based, because if somebody's talking about numbers and charts and graphs, you want to get those things
Yeah,
accurately captioned. It's not
So-
just easy to have something automated,
No.
so it's definitely challenging.
although I was going to comment that I think with Otter AI, it's built into Zoom. The more people use it, and even just like amongst us, the more we use it, the more it recognizes your voice and does a better job of, of interpreting what you're saying accurately. So I guess the point is turn on closed captioning whenever you can. You'll get a better result because it's all machine learning.
And it's definitely the case that the Otter AI in Zoom has improved since it first
Oh
became
my
available.
God.
But what is challenging is how it will autocorrect as it goes. So it starts to write something and it will go back several words and fix something, which is a
Yes.
barrier to like linear reading.
Yeah,
Mm.
I actually just downloaded it to the iPad I have at work, the one that CUNY got for me. And I haven't tested it yet because I haven't really been at the reference desk last week. I only figured out last week, I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I put a speech to text on this and see how it goes? So that's going to be my little fun project for the rest of the semester, is bringing the iPad with me and getting people to talk into it to see like what works and whatnot. So if anything, it's always just a constant, like, just process of trying to figure stuff out. And then that's what we've been sharing amongst the 5 of us, is like, when I had all that trouble with the Streamline mic, it was like, Monica, don't bother putting in for the application for that right now. Let's see if we can find
No, and I already had, and then I had to withdraw it.
Wow. Well, I would be glad to hear the results of all of that. As I said, we are a work in progress, and we're looking at a myriad of options. And the most important thing is to let people know that there are many more options, and trying to find the one that fits you perfectly. No one will fit you perfectly, but one may be more perfect than the other. And so we want to continue to let our students be aware of that. One of the questions that I put in the paragraph I didn't address was that from all of you that either early on.
Hey,
or
Howard,
later, yes.
could you stop for, I just want to tell Terry, if you can stop the recording. I know this
Oh.
is, yeah, so that's fine.